Welcome back. Happy Tuesday, Raider Nation. Welcome back to Silver and Black today, an Odyssey original podcast where we talk nothing but Las Vegas Raiders. We certainly appreciate you guys being with us. Thanks for joining us on our post-game show. Yes, we had it's preseason for us too. Yes, we go all year round, and sometimes, just sometimes, we have some audio issues. And so not only did we have audio issues, Murph was coming straight to us from Allegiant Stadium, and it was really loud in there. So we apologize for that. I heard from you guys that my audio was too low. His audio was too high. It's somewhere in between, because when you have audio issues like that, it happens. Not only that, behind the scenes, you didn't see we had video issues too. Again, it's preseason for us as well. And so we appreciate you guys sticking with us through that. Of course, we'll be doing live videos after every game. So stick with us on that. We'll get it all worked out. In fact, we got most of it worked out on Monday. So we appreciate you guys hanging tough with us. But a great show on tap for us. Hopefully Mo Moten will pop in. He had to run. He had some deadlines pop in. Of course, the Dalvin Cook signing on Monday and a couple other NFL stories. Mo does cover the entire league for Bleacher Report. So sometimes stuff just happens and he can't be here. So he will hopefully jump in later. If he doesn't, you know why. He'll be back on Thursday with us to do a regular show. But in the meantime, we're going to jump in. Guest today, depending when you're listening, will be Vinny Bonsignore, the beat writer for the Raiders from the Las Vegas Review-Journal, also a former contributor on this show, also my former colleague over at Raider Nation Radio in Las Vegas. So looking forward to catch up with Vinny and talk some interesting stuff. Coming out of the game, of course, the Raiders 34-7 victors over the San Francisco 49ers. So we're going to talk to him about that, but also some questions too that we want to get into as far as the changes around the Raiders. We had everybody, if you read all of the post-game stories, you heard it here, you heard it from Murph being on location, obviously, in Las Vegas, and that was this idea that it just feels a little different around the Raiders. And it's one of those situations where, you can't always tangibly put your finger on it, but it's something that definitely has been echoed through all out the coverage, various folks who cover the team for various publications and networks and so on, sort of the same thing. But the game itself, listen, yes, it always feels better to have a win, right? I mean, it just does. At the same time, you kind of have to figure out what you draw from it as well. And so what you draw from it is some interesting things. And one of those things clearly was the splashy play of Aiden O'Connell, which we'll get into as well. And that's where we'll start, because the whole Aiden O'Connell situation has taken kind of the NFL by storm. If you notice the coverage, he just had a great performance. Now, this does not mean he's going to be the next Tom Brady, as some folks compared him to maybe be, or not be, but could be, I should say. And so we're not going to get into that. That's not what we're going to talk about. But clearly, this kid may be the Raiders' number 2 quarterback. In fact, Josh McDaniels after the game said, listen, we're going to give him a ton of playing time. Brian Hoyer did not play. He right now stands as the number 2 on the depth chart behind Jimmy Garoppolo. And remember, with Jimmy Garoppolo's injury history, whoever is number 2 is a big deal, because that person most likely, and we're not saying it's going to happen, but based on history, which is all we have to go off of, Jimmy Garoppolo playing a whole season has not happened in quite a few years. So if that's the case, you need a good number 2 who can carry you for as many weeks as you need it. And so getting Aiden O'Connell work in these games is important. And that's why his performance was so impressive, because he was poised. He threw the ball well. He's incredibly accurate. He made good decisions. I think that's the thing that stuck out to me. All stats aside, what stuck out to me was the idea that he made great decisions. For a young quarterback, especially coming in the NFL, very difficult, right? You saw C.J. Stroud, you saw Bryce Young in Carolina, both struggled mightily in their first action in the NFL, didn't really look well. Aiden O'Connell seemed very comfortable. And being comfortable like that as a rookie in this league is phenomenal. And again, small sample size, one game. I understand that. We're not overplaying that here. We don't overhype anything for clicks. That's not what we're doing. But you have to be happy with what Aiden O'Connell did. And if you look at it, 15 of 18, 141 yards and a touchdown, and 2 of his 3 incompletions, 2 of the 3 were drops. If he hits those 2 passes and finishes like he did, then you're talking about 17 of 18. That's real impressive, even if you're going against San Francisco's backups. Doesn't matter. The enormity of the moment, being in Allegiant Stadium, his first NFL action ever inside a stadium on a Sunday, and he goes out there and hits 15 and 18 passes. So just really impressive. And again, I think that the fact that he handled that first action so well is remarkable. And so you have to give him that. You have to say, okay, that's encouraging. So now does he build on that? He'll obviously play a ton against the Rams this coming Saturday. Of course, the Raiders are in Los Angeles. They flew right after the game and are staying in Los Angeles this week. They will do joint practices with Sean McVay's Rams, and then they will play the Rams at SoFi Stadium on Saturday. Of course, we'll be here with the post-game reaction live right afterwards. But either way, you got to be impressed, right? And I'm the first one to admit, when they drafted Aiden O'Connell, I wasn't negative about him, but I also said, listen, okay, Aiden O'Connell, we'll see if he ever sees the field. Kind of eat my words a little bit, and that's okay. I don't mind being wrong if I am. And again, it's one game. But the way he's been impressive there, and from what we've read and heard from reports, how he's been in practice is phenomenal. So you can't discount that. But I think the fact that he got the ball out so quickly, I mean, you saw that decision making, and to me, that's good. And then after the game, he said, listen, I got a long way to go. He wasn't going to take the adulation that he was getting. He really wanted people to understand that, hey, it's preseason. I know this isn't full speed NFL first string defense I'm going at, but still, neither were the other players for the most part that didn't perform well as rookies, i.e. Stroud and Young. So that in itself is a good barometer, I think, of where this kid is at. We'll see if he continues it, because I really do believe at some point this season he will see action. And again, McDaniels intimated during his press conference they want to give him as much playing time as possible. And the thought, I think, is that, he'll be the number 2 going into the season. Maybe not. We'll see. If he regresses or something happens, that's fine. But the fact that he performed so well under that pressure of his first NFL action was very, very encouraging. So I think you look at that. I know fans were excited about it, and it's something we wanted to see. You just don't see a rookie go out there and usually do that, especially a guy who comes in there and plays in his first NFL action. So from that perspective, you got to like that. And you have to think, okay, we heard about him at OTAs, which you kind of dismiss. It's OTAs. They're in shorts. Then he's in training camp without pads first. Okay, great. Then they get pads on, they start to have action. And he does well there too. Okay, now Jimmy Garoppolo getting action in obviously the last week of practices against the 49ers. But still, you got to be excited about the young guy, and hopefully he can continue to do that, put it together over a course of a couple games, and see where it goes from there. Now, secondarily, the thing that really stuck out as I watched the game again yesterday was really this idea of this team just playing a little different. And I talked about it at the beginning, about this different feel around this team. And on Josh McDaniels' Monday press conference, I was fortunate enough to ask a question, and unfortunately, the Zoom that all of the reporters were on, because Coach McDaniels was in Los Angeles, froze, and that was the end of the press conference. So he answered half my question. But my question was this. My question was, changing culture, building a culture is vital to creating a championship organization, which obviously the Raiders want to do. We've heard Mark Davis say this. You all want them to be. And so I asked him, that's a certainty. You have to build culture, but it's hard. And I asked him to evaluate in the evolution of where they are building this organization in his view, and also obviously with the vision that he and general manager Dave Ziegler have put around it. On that scale of evolution, where are they, and kind of what standards of success have they set for the players and the coaches to get there? And again, because it got cut off, it's not included on the transcript video. But I'm gonna summarize his answer, the answer that he was able to get out, at least half of it, which was he said it takes time, and he likes where it's going. That you got to get people to believe in what you're doing, buy in. Right? We've talked about that, and we think that there's several Raiders who are no longer with the team. All of them good players. Derek Carr being one of them. Of course, Darren Waller. All good players, but perhaps it just wasn't the right mix for the right culture that they're trying to build there. So he answered that and basically said they're making progress. And clearly, this is what I'm going to ask Vinny about too when he joins us next here on Silver and Black Today, is to ask him about that, because he's been at every practice covering this team, and ask him about that, because he wrote a story in the Review Journal on Monday about this kind of idea of what this team wants to do, what they want to be. Who are they? How do they create an identity? Part of that starts in the building before you ever hit the field. Then when you get on the field, there's certain emphasis. Of course, they're emphasizing the pass rush. Hey, all look good on Sunday in Las Vegas. I mean, if you look at the stats, you had multiple players with sacks, clearly, right? You had Amari Burney, you had Adam Butler, you had Isaac Rochelle, and Jordan Willis shared a sack, but they had 4 sacks. Kuntz, Byron Young, all played well in their time, and they created that push the entire game. And not only that, but they created the push in the practices against the 49ers. So you're starting to see some consistency there, at least over the course of a week, first week of live action against another team. So you got to like that. But the whole point of my question to McDaniels was about this culture and about this idea of setting standards. You have to have standards. If you don't have standards of what you're going to do and who you are, it usually doesn't translate well to the field. So in answering that question and saying, hey, it takes time, but he feels better about where it is huge. And I think you saw that last night. You heard Murph talk about it, on Sunday. You heard Murph talk about it on Sunday as well, which was, it just felt different. The guys on the sideline had much more animation to them. They were much more engaged, it seems like. Energy was higher level, and it's just a preseason game. So you like to see that. You like that they're starting there. And that's why the preseason games, while not as exciting to watch because you're not seeing the starters, they're important because they set that mood. They set that piece of the culture that this staff is trying to bring on and trying to get to stick, right? That's not to make excuses for mistakes from last year or mistakes that they'll probably still make. But the idea of buying, it doesn't matter where you work. You all have jobs. You work somewhere. You've worked for people who aren't great to work for, but you've also worked for leaders who create an environment, create an atmosphere, create a culture in which you buy in. And so to me, that is vital and really encouraging to hear from Josh McDaniels and to hear from everybody out there as well. So that's what I take away from the game. I watched the plays. We can talk about the players. We'll talk about some of them with Vinny coming up next. But really, to me, that was the core. That's why I asked McDaniels that question, was because to me, that's the most important thing. Because if you don't get that at the base level, I mean, you have to build your house on a foundation. And if you don't have that foundation, doesn't matter how good the wood is, doesn't matter how good the 2x4s and the wall, the studs, doesn't matter. If your foundation is weak, then you'll find that thing can come crashing down really quickly. And so if that's the case, then if they're starting to build that foundation and that foundation's starting to harden, meaning it's starting to become sturdy, yeah, you might not have all the talent you need to win a Super Bowl, okay? We're not going that far, clearly. But what you do have is you do have the foundation by which you can build upon. You have the buy-in. You have the players who fit the system. And so now you can start to smooth out that road a little bit to become respectable, to become a playoff team, which is where everybody wants the Raiders to go. Okay, we're going to take a break real quick here on Silver and Black Today. When we come back, we're going to be joined by my good friend, Vinny Bonsignore. He's the beat writer for the Raiders at the Las Vegas Review Journal. We'll get his take on all of this coming up here after the break. This is Silver and Black Today, an Odyssey Original Podcast. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back. Silver and Black Today, an Odyssey Original Podcast. And we welcome in an old friend, someone familiar to all of you. Really good guy, great writer, of course. His NFL pedigree, second to none, and that is Mr. Vinny Bonsignore, beat writer for the Raiders at the Las Vegas Review-Journal. Vinny, it's been too long, man. Appreciate you coming on.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
All right, so let's jump in, and I want to start with this team. We'll get into the game early in a second here. But I want to start, first of all, in your game story, you talked about kind of how the team did in this game, not by the end of the score, or the stats, anything like that, but in the way in which they played, the dynamic, as you called it, which I loved. And then I take it a step further, a step up, which is the idea around the culture that this regime in the Raiders organization, Dave Ziegler, Josh McDaniels, are trying to build. That doesn't happen overnight. We saw some of the growing pains with it last year. Talk a little bit about overall being out there every day, covering the team through OTAs, now through training camp. What's the overall feel? Do you feel a palpable difference out there?
Yeah, it does feel a little bit different. I mean, I think we're seeing some of the things that they're making intentional in terms of what they're prioritizing, what they're emphasizing. And this goes all the way back. I remember having a conversation with somebody not long after Derek Carr got benched. And, you know, it was sort of a reflective looking over the season to that point, and really more than that, looking ahead in terms of what the Raiders felt like they were lacking, what the Raiders felt like they needed, what they felt they needed to really prioritize and emphasize this year going into, you know, next year being this year, not just in terms of emphasizing it and talking about it and making it a priority, but go finding players that, you know, embody some of the things that they were looking for, being more disruptive on defense, making plays defensively, making impact plays defensively, being smarter in certain areas of the game, whether it's defensively or with playing with more poise offensively and in key moments of the game. And, I think throughout training camp, I feel like we've seen a smoother operation, a more efficient operation on both sides of the ball, and certainly on defense, the ability to get pressure on the quarterback and, you know, make plays on the back end. We saw a whole bunch of turnovers or interceptions earlier in training camp against themselves. And then Thursday and Friday with the 49ers being in town, I think there were 11 interceptions, I believe. That doesn't just happen. And some of those were good, well thrown balls. It was just players making plays on the ball. And it's something, again, that they've emphasized and really driven home to the players. And you hear them talking about it. You hear them parroting it. You see it, you know, on the practice field. We saw it in the game on Sunday, you know, getting pressure on the quarterback. I think there were 4 sacks, 5 quarterback hits. You know, there were 2 takeaways, both of them in the red zone. The efficiency that they were talking about, they were 4 of 4 in the red zone, converting, you know, touchdowns on trips there. And I think three penalties, which is manageable. So everything that they were talking about for one day came to fruition, but it was really kind of a culmination of what we've been seeing throughout camp.
What's interesting too here, and this is not, you know, we're not going to get into the rehashing of the Derek Carr stuff here, but Derek Carr, Jimmy Garoppolo, you have a change at the guard there, right? You have somebody else coming in, and again, it's nothing against the player who's left. Hopefully he goes on and has a great career in New Orleans, but at the same time, it's a different feel, and that's the quarterback. It's the most important position in the NFL. What is it about Garoppolo that is different, that has this team kind of in a different set of a mindset, I should say, coming in when they're thinking about him being the kind of leader of that offense?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to quantify that yet. We just haven't seen it out there, in an actual game. I think if you're a Raider fan, you have to like how players are describing Jimmy Garoppolo. There's a lot of commenting about his calm demeanor, his leadership, the type of person he is in the locker room. Somebody that I think players really respond to. But until we actually see it on the field, to me, that's just all kind of speculation.
Mm-hmm.
I do think that within the Raiders building, they feel like there's the possibility of a little bit more efficiency, better play in the red zone. He's statistically been a better quarterback than Derek Carr in the red zone. We'll find out pretty quick whether that was circumstance that both quarterbacks were playing with, or maybe there's something that Jimmy G does a little bit better in that area of the field. So that's something to be seen. But I look at Jimmy Garoppolo, and I feel like they feel they can win with him. How much they can win with him, that's going to be determined by a lot of other factors, including the talent around him and how good is this defense. But they feel like if those components, start performing at a higher level, especially defensively, they feel like they can win games and potentially play for a playoff spot. When we're talking about Super Bowls and championships, I can't sit here and say the Raiders believe that they are where they want to be from a roster standpoint or even the quarterback standpoint to really be a perennial championship caliber team. And I can't stress enough how not just badly they want to get to that point, but that's really what this whole thing is all about. It's not about sneaking into the playoffs. It's not about playing pretty good and maybe being a wild card team. Of course, they're going to, if that's what their ceiling is this year, they would happily accept that. But in the whole bigger picture of it, they want to be a team that everybody looks at from year to year and says, that's how it's done. That's who we have to beat. The Raiders are one of those teams that you always have to talk about in terms of Super Bowls and championships and AFC championship games. And they're not there yet, but that's where they want to get to. And that's what the intent is. And that's what the objective is.
Yeah, Vinny, we live in a time of instant gratification, right? And listen, Raider fans will argue with me and say, hey, okay, it's been 30 plus years. That's not instant gratification, but the past is the past. You can't control that. All you can do is look forward and decide what kind of organization you're going to build. And from a leadership standpoint, if you're going to build a perennial winner, you can't start with a soft foundation. You have to have a foundation first. And I love what you said about just not sneaking into the playoffs, because that might be gratifying right now. Let's say if you're a fan or whoever, but long term, that's not what you want, because that doesn't last. And you look at that, and we go to Sunday's game, and in your story, you talked about it. You said, quote, the manner in which they achieved the victory is a different story. It reflected an urgency and importance the Raiders have placed on the core group of dynamics they believe essential to long-term success. So just parroting what you said. But when you look at this game, that's why I know a lot of fans are leery saying, well, it's just one preseason game. That's absolutely true. But you're starting to see some of what they want to build reflected in some of that early play, at least through one small sample size on the field. Is that correct?
Yeah, and it was funny. I got a bunch of texts throughout the game yesterday. One was from an NFL team executives in elsewhere, and what the gist of the text was is that if fans would just kind of chill out a little bit and be patient, they may actually see that Dave Ziegler and Josh McDaniels are pretty good at what they do and are going to be able to get this thing turned around. And there's no guarantee that that's obviously going to happen. But I think the bigger point of that text was it needs time. All of this needs time. It doesn't happen overnight. Like you said, the instant gratification. And, talking about the playoffs, I remember talking to somebody who had been part of the Patriots, right? And is now here with the Raiders. And they were pointing out the playoff team in 2021 of the Patriots with Mac Jones, being the quarterback. And they're like, were we a playoff team? Yeah. It said we went to the playoffs. They went to the playoffs. The Patriots made the playoffs. But their definition of a playoff team, of a championship team, that team wasn't it. They did well. They got to the playoffs. I think they got beat in the first round, in the postseason. But in their mind, it was a nice season, but it wasn't what their standards ever really are in New England. So if you're looking for like an equivalent of that, and not just because the Raiders made the playoffs that year too, and I think inside the Raiders building, especially as last season kind of moved on, they started seeing some of the holes that might have been that might have been there. In terms of how good is this team really? And they used the team in New England in 2021 as an example of good team, made the playoffs. That was a really good accomplishment. But is that where the Patriots really want to be or have been? No, not at all.
No, it's that standard of performance, right? You have to establish that. And to your point, that's either acceptable or it's not. And so it sounds like it's not acceptable. That's not where they want to be long term. So that's a good thing, especially if you're a Raider fan. You got to wait a little longer. but at least that's the right path, I think, to success. Okay, speaking of performance, you jump in, one of the stories around the NFL that is right at the top of the list for most people was Aidan O'Connell. Aidan O'Connell comes in, looked really good. I was most impressed. Yes, he was accurate. I mean, 3 balls he didn't complete, 2 of those were dropped. So he would have been 17 of 18 maybe if they're not dropped. Yeah. But overall, Vinny, the decision-making process for a freshman coming in, I know he's a little bit older, but he comes in as a rookie, I should say, not a freshman. And he comes in as a rookie, and I was just real impressed with his decision-making process, especially under pressure.
Yeah, and again, that's a continuation of what Aiden's been doing throughout training camp. Has it been perfect? No, of course not. This is the NFL. The other players are trying to win jobs and get ready for a season. They're really good, is the bottom line. So it hasn't always been perfect, but I remember. I think I tweeted something last week about how really impressive Aiden's been to the people that matter. With the Raiders, and just me watching him, I felt like he's had a really good camp. Especially for a rookie quarterback, especially where he was drafted. And, there was a little bit of pushback, and I guess some people had reported that he was struggling. And, I just have to say, and nothing against anyone who wrote that, but if that's the takeaway that you had watching Aiden during training camp, it's just wrong. It's inaccurate. And that's just the bottom line of it. And I think that on Sunday, he kind of showed what I've been seeing in training camp, and I know what the Raiders have felt really good about. And it goes beyond just sometimes what you see, on the field. It was nice for Aiden to actually, transfer it to the grass the way he did. But, when you're looking at the full picture of Aidan O'Connell and why the Raiders are so excited about him, it's that part of it, the playing part of it. It's how he is in the locker room. It's also how he is in the classroom, and, the questions that he asks, and how well he's grasped this offense. It's not an easy offense to command, and he's not there yet by any stretch of the imagination. He's got a long way to go with this offense, but everything that they put on his plate, he seems to absorb pretty well and digest pretty well, and they're able to then move on to something else and further, and more and more, and that's going to be the process. As it continues to play out, but so far so good for Aidan O'Connell, and I think we'll see what happens. He's got a long way to go just to show that he could be a backup to Jimmy Garoppolo. I think the preference within the Raiders is that happens sooner rather than later. They're not going to force it by any means, but if they feel that he's ready to assume that kind of a role, if Jimmy G were to go down, I think that they would be ringing bells if at that point Aidan O'Connell was in a position to be able to go in there and help them win some games, especially if there's games that need to be won. That would make it even better for them. Now if they're in a position where all is lost, whether he's ready or not, maybe you just get him out there to see what you have, and to help expedite his process. But I think preferably what they want to see, if Jimmy G were to go down, is that Aiden, whatever the circumstances might be, whether there's something still to be played for or not, that he's going to be ready to go out there and acquit himself pretty well.
Well, especially, I mean, listen, I think to your point about long game, again, they're not going to try to rush the kid, but if he progresses at the rate he is, that's huge bonus for this team, because like you said, nobody wants Jimmy Garoppolo to get hurt. We hope he doesn't get hurt. But at the same time, you look at history, right? So you figure, hey, even if it's 1 or 2 games or 3 games, whatever it is, if this kid's ready to go and playing as well as he is, that's a plus. I know you got Brian Hoyer there too in case, but clearly this is a homegrown talent. You want this kid to develop, and who knows what can happen when you do that. Go to running back. Now, of course, the Josh Jacobs thing, I still say he'll be there week 1. He's a smart kid. I don't think he gives up $10.1 million. But in the meantime, Zamir White's getting the carrying time. He had, I think, a very good first drive yesterday. Fell off a little bit. He showed a little bit of what he can be good at, I think. But at the same time, if you're trying to hold him to the Josh Jacobs standard, it's not going to hold up really well. Talk about what you've seen from him so far in practice and in the game, and sort of what his role might be, even if Josh Jacobs is back.
Yeah, and looking back to yesterday's game, it's tough for running backs in the preseason because generally speaking, you're going to get your 6, 7, 8 carries or whatever, and then it's the next guy's turn, and that's that. So, so people like Josh Jacobs kind of embodies this, but there's a rhythm to running back, where you kind of get settled in and you start getting your legs under you and the feel for the game and the feel for the defensive line. And, the more your offensive line is getting some push, the more the game goes on and there's maybe some fatigue setting in with the defensive line, the better off you are. So for Zamir, I felt like he was on track if he had played the entire game to having a pretty nice game. I would imagine that if they handed the ball 18 times, he would have probably ended up with some pretty good numbers in that game just by getting into a flow and all those types of things. But to answer your question, I think that even if, or when I should say, Josh Jacobs, returns to the Raiders, I think you're going to see a bigger role for Zamir White. I think the Raiders, when you look at the amount of carries that Josh had last year, and credit him for staying healthy, credit him for, handling that load and just being spectacular last year. I don't know if that's a model that the Raiders want to continue to follow. I think they'd rather limit maybe his carries, not limit, but reduce some of those carries to keep him fresher throughout games, throughout the season. And also, they're going to have to at some point prepare for life without Josh Jacobs, which could happen as early as the end of this season. Now, maybe they work together and put something together in terms of a long-term contract, but that's no guarantee. So it kind of behooves the Raiders at some point to figure out, all right, what do they really have in Zamir White? And the only way you're going to learn that is by getting him extended action. And maybe that can satisfy, two objectives. One, keeping Josh Jacobs fresh throughout games, throughout the season, and the other, being able to get a better handle on what Zamir White's all about.
Right, and we've been talking about the running back market in the NFL for the last month, and we know what it is. And then you look at history of what the Patriots did and the system and how they used running backs, and it's pretty clear that you have to start planning for life without Josh Jacobs. As great of a player, as great of a young man as he is, you have to start thinking about that. Staying on offense, Vinny, before we move to the defense, the right side of the offensive line, still a little bit in flux. We saw some change-ups, which is what these games are for, to try guys out, see how it works. We saw Mumford at right tackle. We saw Luminor at right guard. Right now, what's your read on where that might be going? Or do you really believe McDaniels and his staff are still trying to find the right mix there?
Yeah, I don't know if it's necessarily about finding the right mix anymore. It's, hey, if Thayer's ready to go and he's the better option, that's a good problem to have. And I don't think it's anything against Jermaine Illuminar whatsoever. And I'm not saying that Jermaine's going to lose his job, because he could very well be the starting right tackle when it's all said and done. But you want guys to push other guys for starting jobs. And, they drafted Thayer for a reason, and they feel pretty good about him. So that's a good problem to have. Again, and I kind of want to stress this, I don't think it's, anything that Jermaine's not doing. And I don't think that's why there's an open competition over there at right tackle. I just think that Thayer Munford is making a major push for the job. And we've seen with injuries and things like that, it's always good to have as many good players as possible. So, and maybe Jermaine, if Thayer, can win that job, maybe Jermaine becomes sort of that super sub. Maybe he does move to right tackle, although I don't think he really wants to do that. But maybe the super sub role fits him well, or maybe he just responds to the challenge and steps up and holds him off. Either way, I think it's actually a really good problem for the Raiders.
It is. I mean, depth is always a good thing. You got to have it in the NFL. There is attrition, right? So you have to be prepared for that. On the defense, here's what I got really excited about. You talked about the pressure this team put on San Francisco during practice, and then, of course, in the game on Sunday up front. You're talking about Isaac Rochelle. You're talking about Jordan Willis, Adam Butler. These guys really got after it. I saw sort of an energy and an intensity. We see it with Max Crosby every single down, right? But to see these guys play that well up front that quickly, and you've been watching it for weeks, how impressed were you with that? And what does that say about that competition up front on the defensive line?
Yeah, and again, another really good problem to have, because I think what the Raiders ultimately want to get to this year is to have, a good group of 7, maybe even 8 defensive linemen that are rotating in, sort of taking a page out of the Philadelphia Eagles, who had, not to say that they're going to be that. I'm not saying that, but something along those lines where you can go 7, 8 deep and feel good about, that 8th guy, that 7th guy. And don't forget about Nested Jade Silvera. Byron Young, I felt like played a good game for his first time out. Neil Farrell had some moments. Matthew Butler was out there as well. So kind of sneaky under the radar. I know a lot of fans have complained about, what the Raiders have or haven't done defensively. But if you've really been paying attention, they've invested a lot of draft picks the last couple of years in the defensive line, and they've all of a sudden gone away now from, it depends on these young players stepping up and justifying their places on the roster. But if they do, all of a sudden you're moving away from those 1-year deals that they continually have had to do to keep filling the guys that last year were on 1-year deals and weren't that good or had to move on. You look at now 6-7 guys that are 27 and under that are under contract control for the next, for foreseeable future. That's a nice foundation that you can start building and being able to count on to stay together and to build cohesion and chemistry and sort of be one of the rocks of this team. Again, it's all predicated on Tyree and Byron Young and Neil Farrell and Matthew Butler. Obviously, Max Crosby. That's a given. Nessa Jade Silvera. Some of these young players just being able to really show that they belong. But if that's the case, then you look at that defensive line and it's a pretty good situation.
Yeah, absolutely. And you have to hit on those middle round players, right? That's where you do it. That's where some of your bread and butter is. And you have to manage the payroll. You got to do all that stuff. So you got to hit on some of those guys. And it sure looks like some of these guys are going to play hard, compete with each other, which is great for the Raiders. On the defensive back side, Jacorian Bennett's a guy we talk a lot. Mo and I do here. Really like what he's been able to do. That unit on Sunday, I thought did a really great job. Most of the time of wrapping up. Yes, they weren't always necessarily attacking the ball, but that's okay. You have to technically get into the right sound position, and it looks like that mix and the competition there as well is going to make this team better. How do you think about that unit overall and how they look so far through at least the first couple of weeks of camp?
Yeah, just better and deeper, you start talking about the starters and Marcus Peters and Nate Hobbs, and I think Jacorian's going to ultimately win that other perimeter cornerback position. Duke Shelley, who's had a nice couple of days against the 49ers, should have had that interception, obviously, yesterday. He felt terrible about it. David Long, we'll see about Brandon Faison. Amik Robertson, played well last year and has continued sort of his growth. Tyler Hall, people don't really talk about him that much, but that guy's a good football player. And what is that? 6 guys that I just named?
6 guys, yeah.
6 guys that I just named. Sam Webb, who had the interception yesterday. These are, you talk about guys like Long's played in big games. He's been in the Super Bowl. You don't have to say anything about Marcus Peters. That's the name says it all. So all of a sudden you start. When I think of Nate Hobbs, Jacorian Bennett, and Marcus Peters as your starting cornerbacks, it's easy to get excited about that trio right there. And then on top of that, you got guys like Tyler Hall, you got guys like Brandon Faison, and David Long and Duke Shelley as your rotational guys, your nickel dime package guys. That's pretty good too. And I don't remember a time covering this team when there's been that kind of length in the cornerback room, that kind of experience. I think I counted, when you throw in a Brandon Faison in there, I think I counted 70 some odd starts, 250 some odd games played amongst just the guys that are projected right now to be sort of those reserve players. The Raiders haven't had that kind of experience at that part of their depth chart in a long, long time. And that's like gold. And you can see that all those guys kind of know what they're doing. It's not a hope and a prayer, from the coaching staff, hoping that all of these guys, and how many times you go back to 2020 and how young that cornerback room was, and really, almost ever since. But now when you could say, oh yeah, Brandon Faison's, one of the key reserves, David Long Jr., who's played in the Super Bowl, Duke Shelley, who's played a lot of football, that's a marked difference from what we've seen with the Raiders for some time now.
Absolutely. Vinny, well, listen, man, thank you so much for being so generous with your time. We'll catch up with you in the regular season. Make sure you read Vinny, Las Vegas Review Journal. Follow him on Twitter, too. He is not a Twitter psychic, though, so take that for what it's worth. But he is there. He answers your questions. That's what I respect, Vinny. Even people who like to come after you, you always engage them. You try to make them smarter by teaching them a little bit or explaining what you're talking about. So that's certainly nice. Not everybody appreciates it, but we certainly do. Thanks, my friend. Appreciate you being here.
Do the best you can.
That's all you can do. All right. Thank you. We're going to step aside for a break here on Silver and Black today. When we come back, we'll get back to talking Raiders. The Raiders-Rams practices this week in Los Angeles. You're watching Silver and Black today. You might be listening to us too if you're on YouTube. Thanks for joining us as well. We'll be back right after this. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back. Silver and Black today, the home stretch here on a Tuesday. Victory Tuesday, right? Because the Raiders won. Yeah, I know. It's just don't lecture me about being preseason. Just enjoy it while you can. Some of you won't, and that's okay too. You do what you need to do. But we're here talking about Raiders football. I want to thank Vinny Bonsignore, our guest tonight. Great conversation with him, giving you some in-depth there on the Raiders, what they're going to do. And I know I talked about it in the first week. By the way, if you're joining us late, Mo Moten, my partner, got called away on assignment from Bleacher Report because he is, of course, Midtown Mo, right?
It's Midtown Mo.
Yeah, we're playing his theme even though he's not here. But anyway, Midtown Mo got called to Midtown, and he had to take on an assignment, so he had to step out of the show today. He's usually here on Tuesdays, but he had to step aside. So we appreciate you guys being with us. And a reminder to follow us on Twitter. Follow Mo, M-O-E-M-O-T-O-N. He, of course, is the national senior NFL writer for Bleacher Report. You can follow me at LV Gully. The show is SNB Today. If you're watching us on YouTube, thank you. The chat is always awesome. I love all of you guys in the chat, even the ones who want to come on and try to bait me because I grew up a Charger fan originally. It's really funny. But anyway, enjoy that. But thank you guys for being there. Do us a favor, subscribe to the channel. And the most important piece after that is hit notifications. That way, anytime we go with a new show available to you on video, or we're live in postgame, you're going to get a notification so you can jump in the chat and tell us what you think. So please do that as well. Also, subscribe to the podcast wherever you get your audio. Turn on the auto download as well. We would appreciate that too. But anyway, back to some of what Vinny and I were talking about, because I think it's worth, as we close up the show here, it's worth talking about, which is this. And that is this journey that the Raiders are on. I know for all of you who've been Raider fans forever, it's frustrating because you've had all these years losing. You're tired of it. You're sick of it. You don't want to see another rebuild. You don't want to see this. You don't want to see that. I get that. Believe me, I understand. But you cannot build the old adage, you can't build Rome in a day. You can't build a competitive football team, a really, truly winning organization overnight either. That's not to excuse mistakes made last season, especially from a coaching perspective, because I agree with most of you on that. But I know there's a but there. But you have to understand you're setting these standards of performance. Standards of performance say, as Vinny mentioned, the New England Patriots, you can hate them. That's fine. Most people do, including myself. But winning organizations, the Patriots, the Bills now, the Baltimore Ravens of the past, they set an expectation. It's never just an expectation of, oh boy, let's just make the playoffs. That's not what you build for. You build to win a championship. And if you're going to build to win a championship, then just making the playoffs is never good enough. So you have to strive to build your roster, to build your organization, to do that. So the expectations, the standards, and the results have to align. And I think, and again, we all have skeptical nature about us. And in this case, Josh McDaniels has got to prove he can coach this team and win with this team. Dave Ziegler made some nice moves over the last couple years. Yes, there's been a couple stinkers here too, but overall done pretty well. So you have to look at what they're doing and what they're building. It's about winning, yes. But do you want to trade winning? Do you want to trade an 11-6 season where you get a wild card? And I know, you get in the playoffs, anything can happen. I get that. But when your roster isn't fully as good as it could be, and you're 11-6, you get in the playoffs, you can't be happy with that. Raider Nation, as long as it's been from that last Super Bowl victory, 1983, or the last Super Bowl in 2002, you want to win it, right? You don't just want to get in that's never enough. It's enough for these borderline teams who barely make the playoffs ever, all that kind of stuff, right? I mean, you look at the Cincinnati Bengals. They were terrible because their ownership sucked. They were cheap. finally they changed their tune a little bit. They invest, and then they built this team with Joe Burrow. That helped a lot, by the way, getting a franchise quarterback in the first round with the pick. But overall, what I'm saying, though, is you have to build for longevity. And it doesn't matter what you build. I don't care if you're building a deck in your backyard. You're building that massive Star Wars Lego set with your daughter or son. Whatever it is. Building great things never are done quickly. That doesn't mean you can't turn around things quickly and things go your way and you have good fortune, and sometimes the pace increases due to circumstance. I'm not saying that. I'm not saying you guys should wait 5 years for this team to ascend. At the same time, though, it's not going to happen in 1 year or 2 years. 3 years, better expectation. Expectations for the Raiders next year versus this year should be much higher. I agree. Even if they finish under 500, well, you can't go 500 in the NFL anymore. But if they finish 6-11 or 7-10 or 8-9, fine. But next year it better be 11 wins or 12 wins, right? I mean, you have to take that next step. But I think setting those standards and the journey that this team is on are so vital. And I get it. The impatience of fans, that's what fans are for. Fans don't want to lose. So they're not going to say, okay, yeah, let's lose for a couple of years and then we win a Super Bowl. No, you want to win now. And that's okay too, because that's emotional and that's what fans should do in my book. But I think the expectations, the standards you're setting, the results that you will get from that is what you have to focus on. Now, if things fall apart, different story. But I think to what Vinny said, what I said earlier as well, which is this culture change, this fit, were the right players in place for them to win? The answer to them, at least, was no. So you let a beloved, for many people, not all, quarterback go. You let a great potential tight end, when he's healthy, Darren Waller, go. And I think he'll do really well in New York, by the way. Because for whatever reason, it wasn't the right mix. It wasn't the right ingredient. You're making a cake and you make it and it's like, nah, it's okay, but it just doesn't, there's some ingredients here we got to switch out. So that's what they've done. Bring in Jimmy Garoppolo. He's a bridge quarterback. He's not the long-term answer. We know that. That doesn't mean you can't be better with him, though. So we'll see. If he stays healthy, you never know. So I think it's going to be fun to watch this team in the preseason and see who wins out in some of these battles. And I think that's what's going to be exciting. Then the real action starts. Then that difficult early season schedule begins. And then we'll see where the Raiders are at. But I think there is hope for optimism. And no, before you put a comment on YouTube that we are team homers or shills, anybody who watches this show for any period of time knows that's absolutely false. We're critical when we're critical, but we're also going to call it like it is. And I think in this case, you have to watch how this team does. You have to watch what these moves, what they've done, and the expectations and the standards they're setting internally before they even get on the field, how they impact the play on the field. I think that's what we're looking at. And I think it's going to be fun to watch this unfold this year, the ups and downs. It's easy to feel good when things go well, but when things don't go well, how do you react? How do you react to the adversity? That's what's going to decide, I believe, how good this team will be this year. How do they react to a 2-game losing streak if they have one? Or to an early slow start because the schedule is just damn tough. We'll have to see how it all works out. But I'm interested to watch. I feel a little more, as an objective observer, I feel more positive with this team after watching them on Sunday. Now we'll see how they do against the Rams and see if it continues over as well. And we'll bring all that to you. But we certainly appreciate you guys being with us on this Tuesday edition of Silver and Black Today. Again, please subscribe to the podcast wherever you get your audio. Hit us up on YouTube as well. You can follow us on Twitter, SNB Today. I am at LV Gully, and Mo is Mo Moton, Moemoton. Feel free to give him crap on Twitter about missing the show. No, he's working his butt off, so he's excused, as they would say. But he'll be back for the show on Thursday. Once the regular season rolls around, we'll be doing a separate mailbag show because the mail increases 1,000,000-fold. But we'll get to your mail as well on this Thursday. So for Thursday's show, if you have any questions or comments, it's mail@silverandblacktoday.com. That's mail@silverandblacktoday.com. Or you can hit us up on Twitter with the aforementioned handles I gave earlier. And we can answer your question there too. We'll take your question, I should say. We'll answer it on the show. So we certainly appreciate that. All right. For our producer, and that is Mike Rabier, I am Scott Gulbransen. This has been Silver and Black Today, the Tuesday edition. Take care, everybody.